The massive corridors of Unity Academy buzzed with nervous energy as students from dozens of worlds made their way to advanced predator studies. The crystalline beings from Celeste Prime clicked softly as they walked, their translucent bodies catching the artificial sunlight streaming through the station's viewing ports. Behind them, the four-armed scholars from Vega 7 shuffled quietly, their multiple hands carrying data tablets and note-taking devices. Professor Mills, a tall graceful creature with silver skin and large violet eyes, stood at the front of the lecture hall watching her students file in. She had been teaching xenobiology for over 30 years, but today felt different. Today, for the first time in the Academy's history, they would have a student from Earth. The whispers started before he even entered the room. Is that him? The human? From the Death World? Tom Baker stepped through the doorway and the conversations died instantly. He looked remarkably ordinary, brown hair, average height, wearing simple clothes and carrying a basic fabric backpack. Nothing about him seemed threatening, yet every non-human student in the room felt their ancient instincts stirring. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world by the Galactic Education Council. Most civilized species came from peaceful planets where the biggest predators were small creatures that ate plants. Earth was different. Earth was a nightmare world where massive predators ruled and survival meant constant warfare with nature itself. Tom found an empty seat in the third row and sat down with a friendly smile. "Morning, everyone," he said cheerfully. The Zethari student next to him, a delicate blue-skinned female named Luna, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Something deep in her evolutionary memory was screaming warnings about the calm young man beside her. She couldn't explain why, but every instinct told her to move away. Professor Mills cleared her throat. "Class, I want you all to welcome our exchange student, Tom Baker, from Earth. He'll be joining us for the full semester." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the room. The herbivorous students from the garden worlds clustered together instinctively. Even the more confident species seemed on edge. "Tom," Professor Mills continued, "would you like to tell the class a little about yourself?" Tom stood up easily, his movement fluid and controlled in a way that made several students tense. "Sure. I'm studying to be a xenobiologist back home. Earth has a pretty diverse ecosystem, so I thought it would be interesting to learn about life on other worlds. I'm especially curious about how different species interact." His voice was warm and friendly, but there was something underneath it, a quiet confidence that spoke of absolute certainty in his abilities. The predator species in the class recognized it immediately, though they couldn't name what they were sensing. "Wonderful," Professor Mills said, though she too felt oddly unsettled by the human's presence. "Now, before we begin today's lesson, I should mention that this course will involve the study of various predatory species from across the galaxy. Some students find this challenging." She looked directly at Tom as she spoke. "Your planet's reputation precedes you, Mr. Baker. Earth is known for having some of the most dangerous predators in known space. I trust you'll be comfortable with our curriculum." Tom's smile never wavered. "I think I'll manage." As the lecture began, Professor Mills noticed something strange happening in her classroom. The usual dynamic had completely shifted. Normally, her students sat wherever they pleased, mixing freely regardless of species. Today, without any conscious decision, they had segregated themselves. The herbivorous students, the gentle Verdians with their green skin and leaf-like hair, the peaceful Arcturians with their large eyes and flowing robes, had all moved to the far side of the room. The omnivorous species sat in the middle, while the few predatory students had positioned themselves near the exits. Only Tom sat alone, completely relaxed in the center of it all. "Today we'll be discussing the basic principles of predator-prey relationships," Professor Mills announced, pulling up a holographic display. "Can anyone give me an example of an apex predator from their homeworld?" Several hands went up tentatively. A student from Rigel mentioned the cloud hunters that soared through their gas giant's atmosphere. Another described the deep swimmers from the ocean world of Aquatica. "Excellent examples," Professor Mills said. "Now, these are all formidable predators in their environments. But they share something in common: they evolved in relatively stable ecosystems with abundant prey and few competitors." She paused, her violet eyes finding Tom in the crowd. "Mr. Baker, what was the dominant predator on your world during human evolution?" Tom considered this for a moment. "That's a tough question, Professor. We had cave lions, dire wolves, giant bears, saber-toothed cats. Really depended on where and when you're talking about." The classroom went very quiet. These weren't names they recognized, but the casual way Tom listed them sent chills through the assembled students. "And humans competed with these creatures for resources?" Professor Mills asked. Competed with them? Tom looked genuinely confused. No, Professor. We hunted them. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Luna, the Zethari student sitting next to Tom, made a small squeaking sound of distress. You hunted apex predators? Professor Mills repeated slowly. Well, sure, Tom said, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. How else were we supposed to survive? Our world doesn't have many safe places to hide. If you wanted to live, you had to fight for it. Professor Mills realized she was staring. Around the room, her students looked stunned, terrified, or both. This friendly young human had just casually mentioned hunting creatures that would send most of her students fleeing in panic. I see, she managed. Well, that certainly gives you a unique perspective on predator behavior. Tom nodded agreeably. I guess it does. Should be fun to see how other species handle things. As the class continued, Professor Mills found herself watching her human student with growing fascination and unease. Tom participated normally, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about alien ecosystems. But underneath his pleasant demeanor, she sensed something that made her ancient prey instincts whisper warnings. By the end of the first class, one thing was clear: Tom Baker would change everything about advanced predator studies. The question was whether her other students would survive the experience. 4 weeks had passed since Tom Baker joined Advanced Predator Studies, and the classroom dynamics had settled into an uneasy routine. The alien students had grown somewhat accustomed to their human classmate, though they still maintained a respectful distance. Tom seemed oblivious to their caution, treating everyone with the same friendly openness he had shown on his first day. Professor Mills stood at the front of the lecture hall, her violet eyes bright with excitement. Today, class, we have something very special planned. Instead of studying predators through recordings and data, you'll observe a live specimen. A collective murmur rippled through the room. The herbivorous students exchanged nervous glances, while even the more confident species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Now, before anyone panics, Professor Mills continued, raising her silver hands for calm, the creature will be completely contained within our most advanced security field. There is absolutely no danger to any of you. The massive doors at the side of the lecture hall slid open with a pneumatic hiss. 2 maintenance workers in full protective gear wheeled in what looked like a large transparent cube, roughly 10 feet on each side. Energy barriers crackled around its edges, casting everything in a faint blue glow. Inside the containment field, something moved. Luna, the delicate Zethari student, immediately scooted her chair backward. Professor, what exactly are we looking at? This, Professor Mills announced proudly, is a shadow stalker from the void reaches of the Outer Rim. One of the most efficient killing machines ever documented. The creature that prowled within the energy cage defied easy description. It stood roughly the size of a large earth tiger, but its body was built for pure killing efficiency. Midnight black fur seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to look at directly. 6 powerful legs ended in retractable claws that gleamed like metal. Its elongated head housed a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, and 3 pairs of yellow eyes scanned the room with predatory intelligence. Emma, a gentle plant eater from the garden worlds, actually stood up from her seat. I think I should go, she whispered, her green skin pale with fear. Please remain seated, Miss Wilson, Professor Mills said gently. The containment field is absolutely secure. The creature cannot harm you. But the shadow stalker didn't look contained. It moved with fluid grace around the edges of its prison, testing the barriers with occasional swipes of its claws. Each movement was perfectly controlled, economical, purposeful. Tom leaned forward in his seat, studying the creature with obvious interest. Unlike his classmates, who were focused on the predator's threatening aspects, he seemed to be analyzing its movement patterns and behavior. Fascinating, he murmured, loud enough for nearby students to hear. Look how it maps the space. It's already figured out the dimensions of its cage. The shadow stalker's head snapped toward the sound of his voice. For a moment, all 6 of its yellow eyes focused on the human student with laser-like intensity. Professor Mills noticed the interaction immediately. Interesting. Shadow stalkers typically ignore potential prey that they cannot reach. They're remarkably intelligent about conserving energy. It doesn't think I'm prey, Tom said matter-of-factly. The statement sent a chill through the classroom. Several students turned to stare at Tom with expressions ranging from confusion to outright terror. What do you mean? Professor Mills asked carefully. Tom shrugged, never taking his eyes off the creature. Look at its posture. When it looks at the rest of you, its shoulders drop slightly and it shifts into a hunting crouch. But when it looks at me, it stays upright. Alert. It's not seeing food, it's seeing competition. As if to prove his point, the shadow stalker turned its attention to Emma, who was still standing at the back of the room. Immediately, its body language changed. The creature sank into a low crouch, its muscles coiling like springs. A low rumbling sound emerged from its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something that made every non-predator species in the room want to run. Emma sat down quickly, her hands shaking. Remarkable, Professor Mills breathed. In 30 years of teaching, I've never seen a shadow stalker react this way to different individuals. The creature continued its prowling, occasionally pausing to stare at Tom with what could only be described as professional interest. When it looked at the other students, they could see hunger in its eyes. When it looked at Tom, they saw something else entirely, a kind of mutual recognition. Professor, called out Marcus, one of the few predatory species in the class, is it normal for the containment field to fluctuate like that? Everyone's attention snapped to the energy barriers surrounding the shadow stalker. The blue glow that had been steady since the cage arrived was now pulsing irregularly, dimming and brightening in an erratic pattern. Professor Mills frowned, pulling out a small device to check the readings. That's unusual, but well within normal parameters. The field is holding at 97% efficiency. Tom was no longer looking at the creature. His attention had shifted to the containment system itself, and his expression had grown serious for the first time since entering the classroom. Professor, he said quietly, what's the minimum efficiency needed to hold that thing? 80%, she replied. Why? Before Tom could answer, the lights in the lecture hall flickered once, then again. Deep in the station's power core, something was beginning to go very wrong. The shadow stalker stopped pacing and raised its head, as if sensing something the others could not. Its 6 eyes fixed on Tom once more, and for the first time since its capture, the creature began to show signs of genuine agitation. Tom slowly placed his hands flat on his desk, his casual demeanor replaced by something far more focused. Everyone might want to move toward the exits, he said calmly. Mr. Baker, there's really no need for alarm, Professor Mills began. The containment field flickered and dimmed to 75%. The warning signs had been building for minutes, but most of the students were too focused on the shadow stalker to notice. Deep beneath Unity Academy, in the massive power core that kept the space station running, a critical fusion coupling was overheating. The engineers monitoring the system saw the readings climb into dangerous territory, but their emergency repairs were still several minutes away from completion. Tom Baker was the first to understand what was happening. While his classmates stared in fascination at the caged predator, he had been watching the containment field's energy readings on Professor Mills' display screen. The fluctuations weren't random, they followed a pattern that spoke of systematic power failure. Professor, Tom said, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter of his classmates, we need to evacuate. Now. Professor Mills looked up from her data pad, confusion clear on her silver features. Mr. Baker, I assure you the containment protocols are more than adequate. Even if the field drops to minimum levels dash. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in harsh red light, but the damage was done. The containment field around the shadow stalker flickered like a dying flame, its energy output plummeting from 97% to 60% in the span of a heartbeat. Then 50%. 40%. The shadow stalker's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The creature that had been prowling calmly around its cage suddenly exploded into motion, its 6 legs carrying it in rapid circles as it tested every inch of the weakening barrier. Intelligence blazed in its yellow eyes, it understood exactly what was happening. 30%. Professor Mills frantically activated emergency protocols, her fingers dancing over holographic controls as she tried to boost power to the containment system. Security to Lecture Hall 7 immediately, she called into her communicator. We have a potential containment breach. The alien students sat frozen in their seats, paralyzed by evolutionary programming that told them to remain perfectly still when faced with a predator. Emma, the gentle plant eater from the Garden Worlds, had gone completely rigid, her green skin pale with terror. Luna, the delicate Zethari student, was making small whimpering sounds. 20%. The shadow stalker pressed itself against the failing energy barrier, its claws extending to test the field's resistance. Sparks flew where its talons met the flickering wall of light. Nobody move, Professor Mills whispered, her voice tight with fear. Predators are attracted to motion. If we stay perfectly still dash. 15%. The containment field collapsed. For one terrible moment, The shadow stalker stood perfectly still in the center of what had been its cage, as if it couldn't quite believe it was free. Then its head swiveled slowly toward the clustered students, and a sound emerged from its throat that made everyone's blood turn to ice. It wasn't quite a roar, more like the sound of tearing metal mixed with something organic and hungry. The creature's body language shifted instantly from cautious testing to active hunting mode. Its shoulders dropped, its head lowered, and every line of its muscular frame spoke of lethal intent. 6 yellow eyes scanned the room, categorizing targets, calculating distances. Emma broke first. The plant eater's nerves snapped and she bolted toward the exit, her movement triggering every hunting instinct the shadow stalker possessed. The predator's head snapped toward her fleeing form, muscles coiling for a leap that would end her life in seconds. That's when Tom Baker moved. He didn't run toward the exit like every rational being in the room wanted to do. He didn't freeze in terror like his evolutionary programming should have demanded. Instead, he stood up slowly, deliberately, and stepped directly into the shadow stalker's line of sight. "Hey," he said quietly. The single word, spoken in a tone of absolute calm, stopped the predator mid-crouch. The shadow stalker's head turned toward Tom, confusion flickering across its alien features. In all its existence, prey had never willingly drawn its attention. Tom took another step forward, placing himself between the creature and his terrified classmates. His posture was relaxed but ready, balanced in a way that spoke of countless generations of evolutionary pressure. This wasn't the stance of prey trying to look threatening, this was the bearing of something that had earned its place at the top of the food chain. The shadow stalker straightened slowly, its yellow eyes fixed on the human with laser-like intensity. Something in its predatory brain was trying to process what it was seeing. The other creatures in the room registered clearly as prey, soft, weak, terrified. But this one was different. This one felt dangerous. Professor Mills watched in stunned silence as the most lethal predator she had ever studied actually hesitated, in the face of one small human. Around the room, her students pressed back against the walls, too terrified to move, too fascinated to look away. "Professor," Tom said without taking his eyes off the shadow stalker, "how long until security arrives?" 2 minutes, she whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "Good," Tom replied. "Everyone else, move very slowly toward the exits. Don't run. Walk." The standoff stretched into eternity. Human and alien predator regarded each other across the lecture hall, two apex species from different worlds recognizing something fundamental in each other. The shadow stalker's muscles remained coiled, ready to explode into lethal motion, but something held it back. In Tom's steady gaze, in his absolute lack of fear, the creature sensed something it had never encountered before, not just another predator, but something that might actually pose a threat to it. The first student reached the exit. Then another. The shadow stalker's head twitched toward the movement, but its eyes snapped back to Tom as he shifted slightly, maintaining its attention. 1 minute until security arrived. 1 minute to keep a perfect killing machine focused on him instead of the helpless beings slowly filing out behind him. Tom Baker, exchange student from Earth, smiled. The shadow stalker had killed hundreds of creatures across dozens of worlds. It was a perfect predator, evolved over millions of years to be the ultimate hunter. Nothing in its experience had prepared it for what it was seeing now. Tom Baker stood 15 feet away, completely still except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. His brown eyes never left the creature's 6 yellow ones. There was no fear in his gaze, no panic, no desperation. Instead, there was something the shadow stalker had never seen directed at it before, calm evaluation. The predator's confusion was visible. Its head tilted slightly, muscles twitching as conflicting instincts warred within its alien mind. Every scan of Tom's body language told it this should be prey. Humans were soft, had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. They should run screaming from something like the shadow stalker. But Tom wasn't running. He wasn't even backing away. Behind the human, Professor Mills was quietly directing the last few students toward the exits. Luna, the delicate Zethari, was halfway to the door, her crystalline skin flickering with stress patterns. Emma had already disappeared into the corridor, her survival instincts finally overriding her fascination with the standoff. The shadow stalker's attention flickered toward the movement, and immediately Tom shifted his weight. It was a subtle change, barely visible, but it carried meaning that transcended species barriers. The message was clear: your business is with me now. The predator's focus snapped back to Tom, and for the first time in its life, it felt something it had never experienced before. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. This small, seemingly defenseless creature was acting like an equal. Like a rival predator defending its territory. Tom took a single step forward. The movement was slow, controlled, but it sent shockwaves through the shadow stalker's perception of reality. Prey didn't advance toward predators. Prey ran, hid, begged for mercy. But this human was walking toward 6 feet of perfectly evolved killing machine as casually as if he were approaching a friend. "Easy there," Tom said softly, his voice carrying a note of authority that made even Professor Mills stop breathing. "Nobody needs to get hurt today." The shadow stalker's response was immediate and primal. It dropped into a full combat crouch, claws extending, muscles coiling for a strike that could tear through steel plating. A low growl emerged from its throat, a sound that had been the last thing countless creatures heard before dying. Tom didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted his own stance in response, his body language changing in ways that his alien observers couldn't fully understand but instinctively recognized. His shoulders squared, his head lowered slightly, and his hands moved away from his sides. It was subtle, but the message was unmistakable. "I'm ready for you." For 30 seconds that felt like hours, predator and human circled each other slowly. Tom matched the shadow stalker's movements with unconscious precision, his steps flowing like water, never giving the creature an opening while never backing down. To the terrified observers still in the room, it looked like some ancient dance, a ritual as old as life itself. The shadow stalker feinted left, testing Tom's reactions. The human shifted smoothly to counter, his movements so fluid it seemed practiced. The predator tried again, a quick dart to the right, and again Tom was there, ready, balanced, unafraid. Something was happening that defied everything the creature understood about the universe. This soft, clawless biped was matching it move for move, reading its intentions as clearly as if they spoke the same language. More disturbing still, Tom's responses weren't desperate or panicked, they were confident, professional, almost bored. The realization hit the shadow stalker like a physical blow. This wasn't prey trying to look dangerous. This was another apex predator, from a world so hostile that it had forged beings capable of standing toe-to-toe with the galaxy's most lethal hunters. Tom seemed to sense the shift in the creature's understanding. "That's right," he said quietly, never breaking eye contact. "We're both professionals here. Both survivors. But these others?" He gestured slightly toward the remaining students without looking away. "They're under my protection now." The shadow stalker's growl faded to uncertainty. In its yellow eyes, confusion mixed with something that might have been respect. For the first time in its existence, it was face to face with something that didn't register as prey, predator, or neutral. Tom was something new, a guardian predator, evolved not just to hunt but to protect. The creature took a step backward. The movement was so unexpected that Professor Mills gasped audibly. Shadow stalkers didn't retreat. They were apex predators who had never known defeat, never shown submission to anything. But this wasn't submission. As Tom remained perfectly still, the predator continued its slow withdrawal, moving not in fear but in recognition. One professional acknowledging another. One apex species giving way to another that had proven its right to the territory. The classroom door burst open as security teams flooded in, emergency containment equipment ready. They stopped dead at the sight before them, the escaped shadow stalker sitting calmly in the far corner of the room, and Tom Baker standing relaxed in the center, as if nothing unusual had happened. "About time," Tom said cheerfully, finally breaking eye contact with the creature. "He's been very well behaved, but I think he'd like to go back to his cage now." The shadow stalker allowed itself to be recaptured without resistance, though its 6 yellow eyes never left the human who had somehow convinced it that retreat was the wisest option. As the containment teams led the creature away, Tom turned back to his stunned classmates with his usual friendly smile. "Well, that was interesting," he said. "Should we continue with the lesson?" The silence in the lecture hall was so complete that the gentle hum of the station's life support system seemed deafeningly loud. 23 alien students sat frozen in their seats, staring at Tom Baker as if seeing him for the first time. Professor Mills stood at her podium, her violet eyes wide with something between amazement and terror. Tom brushed imaginary dust off his simple shirt and returned to his seat, pulling out his notebook as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. "Sorry about the interruption, Professor," he said with the same friendly tone he had used on his first day. "Where were we in the lesson?" Professor Mills found her voice after several attempts. "Tom, what just happened here? That creature has never shown retreat behavior. Ever. In 40 years of study, no shadow stalker has ever backed down from anything." Tom looked genuinely surprised by the question. "It wasn't backing down, Professor. It was making a professional decision. We both recognized what the other was, and it decided the situation wasn't worth the risk. Risk? The word came out as barely a whisper from Luna, the delicate Zethari student. What risk could you possibly pose to something like that? Tom considered this carefully, as if trying to explain something very obvious to someone who couldn't see it. Well, it's not about what I could do to it right now. It's about what I represent. He gestured around the room at his classmates, most of whom were still pressed against the far walls. Look, everyone here comes from worlds where life is pretty easy, right? Plenty of food, mild weather, predators that are manageable or rare. Your species evolved to be smart, artistic, peaceful. That's wonderful. Tom's expression grew more serious. Earth is different. Earth tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Earthquakes, floods, storms that could level forests. And the predators. He shook his head. We had to share our world with things that make that shadow stalker look like a house pet. Emma, who had crept back into the room after the creature was removed, raised a trembling hand. But you're so small. You don't have claws or fangs or armor. How did you survive? By being smarter, Tom replied simply. And by never giving up. Humans are persistence hunters, Emma. When we decide something needs to die, we don't stop until it's dead. We can run for days without rest. We can track prey across continents. We can make tools that turn our weaknesses into strengths. Professor Mills slowly moved closer to Tom's desk, fascination overcoming her caution. But what you did back there, that wasn't hunting behavior. You were protecting the other students. Tom nodded. That's the other thing that makes humans different. We don't just hunt to survive, we hunt to protect. Our pack, our family, our tribe. And right now, all of you are part of my pack. The statement sent ripples of shock through the classroom. Several students exchanged glances, unsure whether to feel honored or terrified. Pack behavior, Professor Mills murmured, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Your species developed cooperative hunting strategies. Among other things, Tom agreed. We learned that the scariest predator in the universe isn't the biggest or strongest or fastest. It's the one that never stops coming, that adapts to every defense, that protects what it cares about no matter the cost. Marcus, one of the few predatory species in the class, leaned forward with intense curiosity. The shadow stalker sensed this somehow? Predators recognize other predators, Tom explained. But what it saw in me wasn't just another hunter. It saw something that hunts hunters. Something that evolved specifically to take down apex predators bigger and stronger than itself. He looked around the room at faces filled with wonder and fear. On Earth, humans hunted cave bears that weighed 2,000 pounds. We brought down mammoths the size of small ships. We survived attacks from saber-toothed cats that could bite through bone. And we didn't just survive, we won. Professor Mills sat heavily in her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. Your entire species evolved as apex predator hunters. Not just hunters, Tom corrected gently. Guardians. We protect what we claim as ours. And the thing about humans is, we claim a lot. Our families, our friends, our communities, our entire species. We even protect other species when we decide they need protecting. Luna spoke up in a tiny voice. Is that why you didn't run? Because you decided we needed protecting? Tom's smile was warm and genuine. You're my classmates. My friends. Of course I wasn't going to let anything hurt you. The simple statement, delivered with such casual certainty, stunned the room into silence again. These aliens, most of whom came from species that barely understood the concept of violence, were trying to process the idea of someone willingly facing death to protect relative strangers. This changes everything, Professor Mills whispered. Humanity's role in galactic society, the way we understand survival instincts, pack dynamics. Tom shrugged, a very human gesture that somehow seemed profound in the current context. We're not that special, Professor. We just come from a world that didn't give us any choice but to be strong. And being strong means protecting those who can't protect themselves. He opened his notebook and looked expectantly at the front of the class. So, about that lesson on predator behavior? I think I might have some interesting perspectives to share. Outside the lecture hall, word was already spreading throughout Unity Academy. The human exchange student had faced down a shadow stalker and lived. More than that, he had made it retreat. But the real story, the one that would reshape how the galaxy viewed humanity, was simpler and more profound. Tom Baker hadn't just survived an encounter with a perfect predator. He had protected his pack. And that, his alien classmates were beginning to understand, was what made humans truly dangerous. They weren't just apex predators from a death world. They were guardians who had decided the entire galaxy was worth protecting.